Paris, where every flower tells a story. The candle flickered softly in the shop window as the early morning hush settled over Rue des Abysses. Paris had yet to stir, the cobblestones still cool from the night, and the sky hung low with the kind of delicate gray that hinted at rain but promised nothing. Behind the counter of fleur de memoire, Elise moved with careful grace, the way one learns to move in sacred places. She was no longer just a visitor, no longer the girl searching for something nameless. She was the keeper now. She had lit the candle the way Henri had taught her, never rushed, always with intention. "It isn't about the flame," he'd once said. "It's about remembering that every light we carry matters, even the quiet ones." It had been 4 years since the morning she found him gone, sitting peacefully with that daffodil behind his ear. For years since she had whispered a shaky promise into the stillness. "I'll keep it alive." And she had. The shop had changed, but only slightly. A fresh coat of soft blue paint. A refurbished sign, lovingly rebrushed by a neighbor artist. More shelves, filled with volumes of stories written by strangers who had once walked in, broken or blooming. But the soul of it, Henry's soul, remained untouched. She had kept his chair behind the counter, never sat in it herself. It was not out of reverence, but rhythm. Some spaces weren't meant to be replaced. They were simply meant to be remembered. Outside, Paris yawned and began its slow awakening. A woman in a red coat passed by with a sleeping child in her arms. A baker opened his doors 2 streets over. The scent of early croissants drifted into the air. Life was steady here. Not always easy, but steady. The bell above the door gave a soft chime. Elise looked up and smiled instinctively. It was her first customer of the day. He was young, perhaps 19 or 20, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of uncertainty in his posture that often belonged to the heartbroken. He looked around the shop like he had stepped into a cathedral, not a flower boutique. "Bonjour," Elise said warmly. The young man nodded. I'm not really sure what I'm doing here." She tilted her head, hands behind her back. "That's the perfect way to begin." He looked confused. She moved slowly to the arrangement table and picked up a single, delicate sprig of lavender. "Who are you thinking of?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "My grandmother. She passed last week." "I'm sorry. She raised me," he added, voice cracking slightly. She loved lavender. Elise selected another flower, a white daisy, for gratitude, and then a small yellow rose, for warmth that never left. He watched her hands as she assembled the bouquet, soft, deliberate movements, like she was sewing something invisible back together. She tied the parchment and handed it to him. She said, "There's a notebook on the counter, if you'd like to leave her a memory." He stared at it. "Is this tradition?" She smiled gently. "No, it's healing." He nodded, and after a moment, he walked to the counter, picked up the pen, and began to write. Elise stepped away, not reading over his shoulder. She never did. Some things were meant to be written without eyes watching. He left the bouquet in his arms, and a piece of his sorrow behind. That notebook, like the dozens before it, was a garden of words. In it were confessions, farewells, apologies, poems, and names. So many names, some signed in full, others only with a first initial. Pages that had seen tears fall and ink blur. Pages where the forgotten were remembered, and the remembered were finally heard. Henri had started the tradition. Elise had expanded it. Some days, people came just to write, even without buying anything. She let them. Later that afternoon, she took a break near the back, sitting in the sunlit corner Henri once called the story seat. She cradled a steaming cup of jasmine tea and stared out the open back door where vines of clematis grew along the brick wall. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that sometimes came before something important. She thought of her own first bouquet here. That day with the cornflower, the lily of the valley, and the blood-red ranunculus. She had not known then that the flowers would shape her life, that their language would become her own, that in serving others' memories, she would come to understand her own. She had come to Paris, originally, not to stay, but to forget, to escape the ghost of a love she had lost. Adrien, the boy who once kissed her beneath the old railway clock, who never wrote again after his final deployment. The war had ended. But her questions never had. She never found out if he lived or died. Some people remain a comma in your story, never a period. But over time, with every bouquet she made for another broken heart, something softened in her. She forgave him. Or maybe, she forgave herself for never moving on sooner that a familiar voice broke her reverie. Still using too much jasmine in the tea. I see. Elise turned sharply and smiled in disbelief. Simone, she gasped. Simone was Henry's niece, an architect who had once visited the shop the summer before Henri passed. She had spent 3 weeks helping Elise repair the window frames, drinking strong espresso and reciting poetry between hammer blows. She was loud, vivid, with the kind of laugh that made cats blink and flowers perk up. Back from Berlin? Elise asked, rising to embrace her. Back for good, Simone said. The city's too fast. Paris still has soul. I've been dreaming about this place. They sat down together in the back, feet tucked beneath them, and for a long while, they didn't speak, just drank tea and listened to the sounds of life in bloom. I still hear him sometimes, Simone said finally. Uncle Henri. When the wind moves through certain corners of the city. Elise nodded. I see him when I mix bouquets. When I forget the name of a flower and suddenly remember. Simone reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, folded envelope. I found this in a box of his things, she said. It had your name on it. Elise stared at it for a long time before taking it. The paper was soft, yellowed with time, the handwriting unmistakably his. She opened it slowly. Elise, if you're reading this, it means the candle is still being lit, and for that, I am grateful. I never told you this, but you were the shop's greatest story. You came in carrying silence, and you taught the walls how to listen again. Fleur de Memoire was built not for selling, but for sheltering. Every flower was a memory, and every visitor a chapter. But I needed someone to carry the book when I could no longer turn the pages. You became that someone. Thank you for hearing the forgotten. Thank you for remembering me. Light the candle. Let it bloom. Henry Elise folded the letter with trembling hands and pressed it gently against her chest. They sat quietly for a long while. No words were needed. Later that night, when the streetlights blinked awake and Paris settled into its twilight hum, Elise stayed behind the counter longer than usual. The door was locked. The lights dimmed, but the candle still burned. She opened the latest notebook. Pages fluttered in the breeze. She paused at the newest entry, one that hadn't been there earlier. T read. I stood outside the shop every year on your birthday. I was afraid you wouldn't forgive me. I went to war and came back someone I didn't recognize. I didn't write because I couldn't explain the emptiness I carried. But I never stopped loving you. Never stopped waiting to walk through this door. Her breath caught. She looked up, the door still closed. But her heart? Wide open. She stepped outside onto the cobblestones, her eyes searching the fading street. And there, under the railway clock, stood a man. Older, bearded, with silver threading his hair. But his eyes were Adrian's. She walked to him slowly. Unsure if she was dreaming, he looked at her the way a boy looks at a lighthouse after years lost at sea. I didn't think I deserved to find you, he said. She reached for his hand, and this time, the silence between them wasn't full of absence. It was full of presence, of answers, of peace. They returned to the shop together, and though neither spoke much, they both smiled when the candle flickered softly in the window. Inside, the flowers rustled gently in their sleep, and Elise knew. Paris would always be a place where every flower told a story. But some stories, at last, get to bloom. Tokyo, the lantern maker's daughter. The alleys of Asakusa glowed with a softness that the world seemed to forget. In Tokyo, where glass towers scraped the sky and trains cut the silence with surgical precision, this little corner of the city remained untouched, timeless, almost sacred. It was in one such alley, behind a weathered Norran curtain painted with fading chrysanthemums, that an old shop stood quietly defying time. It bore no signboard, only a single red lantern hanging above the entrance, gently swinging even when there was no wind. Its fabric was worn thin with age, but the character for light was still clear, drawn by the hand of a man who had once written love into every stroke. Inside, the scent of old paper, burnt oil, and camellia blossoms hung in the air. Rows of hand-painted lanterns lined the walls, each one unique, stories folded in silk and ink. Some bore names, others small poems. Some had images of temples, cranes, or moonlit rivers. All of them whispered something to the center of the room sat a wooden work table, cluttered but organized, like a shrine built for creation. A brush holder carved from cherry wood. A cup of clean water. Folds of white washi paper waiting to bloom into light. Behind the table sat Hannah. Her name meant flower, but it was her stillness that left an impression. She moved slowly, deliberately, her fingers elegant, her eyes soft and far away. She wore her father's apron, stained with pigment and oil, though he had been gone for many years now. She rarely spoke. She didn't need to. The lanterns did the speaking. People came to her shop not for modern lighting or quick repairs, but for something else, something quieter. They came to have memories mended, names painted, farewells written in gold. It was said that if Hannah made a lantern for you, it would remember your grief long after you had forgotten it. The truth was, Hannah did not forget. She remembered everything. Her father had taught her that light was not just for seeing, but for feeling. A lantern, he once said, is a small sun you give to someone in the dark. He had painted thousands in his lifetime. For weddings, for funerals, for war ceremonies, for mothers who had lost children and children who never met their fathers. But he had never painted one for himself. The day he died, the candle inside his favorite lantern went out on its own. Hannah had watched it flicker at twilight, then dim until only smoke remained. She did not cry. Instead, she sat at his table and painted her first lantern alone. It bore a single crane in flight, wings stretching across the curve, and a poem. The light does not vanish, it walks beside the wind. Now, 10 years later, she was still painting, still remembering, until one rainy morning in June, a stranger entered. He did not announce himself. The bell above the door did not chime. Hannah had removed it years ago. Noise was an uninvited guest here. He stood in silence for a long while, studying the lanterns, his hair wet from the rain, his coat soaked through. She looked up. He looked back. "Are you the lantern maker?" he asked softly. She nodded once. I need a lantern," he said, "but not for myself." Hannah gestured for him to sit. He did, awkwardly, his hands restless on his knees. "It's for my brother," he said after a moment. "He died last winter, in the mountains." His body was found weeks later, frozen but peaceful. He was a photographer, always chasing snow. She listened without speaking, reaching for her brush and blank washi paper. "I want him to be remembered," he added, "not just as someone who disappeared." She dipped the brush in ink. "What was his name?" she asked. "Ron." Hannah paused. "Your name?" "Haruki." She gave a small nod. "What would you like the lantern to say?" Haruki hesitated, then pulled something from his coat pocket, a small black and white photograph. It showed two boys, no more than 10, standing beneath a cherry tree. One held a kite, the other, a lantern. "This was the last photo he ever printed," Haruki said. "I found it in his darkroom." Hannah took the photo gently, studied it. "I'll paint the tree," she said. "And the kite. You'll know the rest when it's finished." He looked like he wanted to ask more, but something in her tone, the steadiness, the finality, stilled his tongue. He nodded and left. For days, she worked in silence. The photograph sat on her desk, weighted by a river stone. She painted the cherry tree first, its branches wide, reaching, not blooming. Then the boy with the kite, rendered in quiet gray. The second boy, she left unfinished at first, her brush hovering above the page. Unsure. She didn't know Ren, but she knew grief. Eventually, she gave him wings, not wings like an angel, but wings like wind, brushed softly into the background, visible only if you looked closely. When it was done, she lit the candle inside and placed it by the door. Haruki returned before sunset. As if he'd known the exact moment, he stared at the lantern for a long time, silent. Then he cried, not loud, not sudden, just a slow, steady stream of tears that blurred his vision and softened his breathing. Thank you, he whispered. She bowed slightly. He left with the lantern, carrying it like it was something sacred. The next morning, Hannah received a letter that it was from Haruki. He had placed the lantern on Ren's favorite hill, lit it beneath the moon, and waited until sunrise. He wrote that for the first time in months, he could breathe again. He ended the letter with, "If you ever forget how beautiful your lanterns are, know that last night, my brother's memory lit up the whole sky." Hannah folded the letter and placed it in her drawer, beside many others, some yellowed with age, some ink barely dry. A box of thanks, of sorrow, of names she could never forget. Days passed. Then weeks. Haruki came again. This time, he brought no photograph. Only a story. "There's someone else I want to remember," he said. She didn't ask who, but he told her anyway. "My mother." He smiled sadly. She used to sing while watering the garden, always out of tune. She had a way of laughing before the joke was finished. Hannah looked up from her brush. Favorite flower? Plum blossoms. Favorite season? Winter, strangely. Hannah began to sketch a plum tree in snow. As she worked, Haruki didn't leave. He sat quietly in the corner, watching the rain slide down the window. It became a ritual. Every time he came, he stayed a little longer. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. In the shop, time slowed. Words became optional. Eventually, he brought her lunch. Then stories. Then silence that didn't feel empty. One day, he came without asking for a lantern. "I just wanted to sit," he said. She nodded, clearing a space beside her table. He watched her work in silence, his gaze steady but soft. After a while, he said, "Do you ever paint lanterns for yourself?" She didn't answer. Later that night, after he left, she sat at the table long after the oil lamp had burned low. And for the first time in years, she painted for herself. It was a simple lantern, and no names. No poems, just two brushstrokes, a cherry blossom and a hand reaching for it. She didn't light it. Not yet. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The lantern shop remained still. Haruki began bringing his camera. He never photographed Hannah. Only the lanterns. He said they held more expression than faces did. She let him point one evening. Just before spring, he brought a letter. "This was written by your father," he said. "I found it in the photo archive. He asked me to return it to you if I ever met you." Hannah stared at the envelope, her father's writing. Soft, precise. She opened it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Hannah, I knew you would carry the light better than I ever did. You see, I built lanterns because I could not speak my sorrow aloud. But you listen to sorrow. You hold it gently. That is a far greater gift. One day, someone will come into your shop not for a lantern, but to remind you that you are not made only of silence. Let them in. Love always." Papa, she cried for the first time in years, and Haruki, who said nothing, simply sat beside her. That night, they did not light lanterns. They watched the moon. 2 months later, when cherry blossoms began to fall like snow, Haruki brought one final request. "Make one for yourself," he said. "Light it. Let it speak." Hannah hesitated. "I don't know what it would say," she admitted. He smiled. "It already knows." And so, she painted. This time, not with memory, but with hope. A river. A bridge. Two people walking toward each other, holding lanterns. And when she lit it, the flame danced brighter than she remembered. Haruki reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood in the shop, surrounded by light and silence. And for the first time, Hannah realized she had become the light she once gave away. Los Angeles, the city of love. Los Angeles. The city of dreams, they call it. But I always thought it was the city of memory. Of shadows and coffee-stained corners, forgotten songs on jukeboxes that no longer work, and love letters never sent. I never believed in love stories that sparkled with camera flashes. I believed in the kind that grew like ivy, slow, quiet, patient, and if you weren't careful, you'd trip over them years later. I came back to LA after 17 years away. Not for fame, not for fortune, but because I had nowhere else left to go. My mother had passed, and her little vintage store on Melrose. Hazel's treasures had been left to me. I remembered it vaguely from my childhood. Always smelled like lavender and something older, like paper or stories. The first time I walked back through that door, it felt like walking into a time capsule. Dust floated in the warm light from the windows. A cracked mirror leaned against a wall, next to an old RCA radio and stacks of vinyl records. My fingers trailed across an old black-and-white photo of her, young, beaming, holding a bouquet of peonies in front of the shop. That was when I found the first letter that IT was tucked beneath a drawer in her writing desk. Yellowed paper, ink faded but still legible. If he ever returns, tell him I waited. I always waited. No name, no address, just E. For some reason, it haunted me. The shop needed repairs. The roof leaked. The windows stuck. But something kept me here. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was the idea that someone once waited for someone they loved in this very spot. I started sleeping in the back room, among the old movie posters and lamps that didn't match. My life became a gentle rhythm. Morning coffee, fixing shelves, discovering more of my mother's hidden stories. She kept hundreds of little boxes, labeled only with dates. Inside, pressed flowers, matchbooks from places like the Blue Plate Diner, handwritten receipts, napkins with lipstick kisses. This city had spoken to her in fragments, and now it was whispering to me. One night, I walked to the old Sunset Silvers Theater 2 blocks over. It had closed years ago, but the marquee still hung with ghost letters, double feature, Casablanca and Roman Holiday. I sat on the steps, the air warm and heavy with jasmine. That's when I heard a voice. You know they used to hide love letters in that marquee, she said. That I looked up. She was holding a paper bag of groceries, wearing a deep green coat, and a scarf knotted perfectly around her neck. Her hair was dark, clipped at the sides, with the kind of classic elegance that didn't belong in this decade. Love letters? I asked. She smiled. Back in the 50s. Projectionist and the girl at the ticket booth. It was their secret drop point. You seem like you've been here before. I was born here, on this very street, she said, sitting beside me without asking. I'm Camille. James, I replied. James, she said, as if she were tasting the syllables. You're Hazel's son. I nodded slowly. You knew her? She turned toward me, eyes a little shinier than before. Everyone knew Hazel. She gave people hope in this city, long after the glamour ran out. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. Camille was unlike anyone I'd ever known. She owned a tiny bookstore tucked beside a faux shop near Vermont. Her store smelled of cardamom and cedarwood, and she arranged her books not by title or genre, but by mood. Books that ache, books that forgive, books for when the city feels too loud. We started seeing each other every other day. She'd bring leftover pastries from the bakery next door, and I'd share whatever strange treasure I found in one of my mother's boxes. One afternoon, I showed her a postcard that a black and white image of Echo Park, postmarked 1962. On the back, in red pen, we met under the third lamppost. I never forgot you. She stared at it for a long time. I think I know who wrote this, she whispered. That's how it began. We started tracing stories that we'd follow, addresses scribbled on matchbooks, initials etched on diner plates. We'd visit places that had long since changed names. Old cinemas turned nail salons, jazz bars now dry cleaners, and we'd sit outside, reading old letters and wondering about the people who left them behind. One evening, we took a ride down to Musso and Frank, the oldest restaurant in Hollywood. Camille swore that someone had once proposed to her grandmother in booth number 9. The waiter, white-haired, charming, and impossibly elegant, overheard us. You mean Mr. Granger? He asked, grinning. I remember the night he dropped the ring in the soup. We laughed until our sides hurt. Love had once lived here. Not the billboard kind, but the quiet, clumsy, deeply human kind. And slowly, Camille and I started leaving our own story behind, in tiny ways that we left a rose tucked behind the payphone outside Cantor's Deli. A Polaroid taped under the seat at the Griffith Observatory. A handwritten poem folded into the spine of a library book. One rainy Thursday, we found a journal in a wooden cigar box behind my mother's counter. Inside, entries from the 1970s. Names, places, notes about couples, always in initials. M+C arguing on 3rd and Fairfax again. But she held his hand. Camille read it aloud as we sat on the floor, knees touching, wrapped in a threadbare quilt. She was recording their love stories, she said. She was mapping the city of love. I added WY Winter. We'd collected over 100 stories, and then came the letter. The last one folded in a pressed flower book, dated 1981. James, if you ever come back to this city, I hope you fall in love the way I once did. Slowly, without realizing it. With someone who shows you the quiet parts of LA, the places no one photographs, but where the real stories live. Let her show you what I couldn't. It was signed. Your mother. I remember setting the letter down and looking at Camille, who had tears in her eyes. She knew, she whispered. She knew I'd find you. I said. That night, we danced in the middle of the empty street outside the shop. No music, just us, and the city breathing softly around us. That I never thought a city like Los Angeles could hold so much silence, so much softness. But now I know that it's in the clink of coffee cups at old diners, the flicker of neon signs that refuse to die, the peeling movie posters and whispered promises behind velvet curtains, that it's in every second chance. Every missed connection that finally finds its way home. That it's in Camille's voice when she tells me about the books she loves. It's in the way she writes my name on brown paper bags. It's in her key beside mine on the shop counter. And it's in the way we keep writing new letters together, hiding them across the city for lovers who haven't met yet. Los Angeles. The city of dreams. Know the city of love.